It's that time of year again. I'm talking Bilderberg. Let's enter the buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as...
Tony Gosling is a BBC-trained journalist gone rogue. He now hosts Bilderberg.org, thisweek.org.uk, 911movement.org/UK, and as a consummate journalist, he's always working to expose the world elite and what their plot and agenda really is. So we'll be discussing this right here, right now. Tony, thanks for joining us. Given the Bilderberg conference of this past weekend, I would love to know what the corporate luminaries and the politicians from the Western world are gathering together to discuss over this past weekend. What's the noise? What's the buzz?
Well, they always put out a thing called a press release back in the early days, in the mid-1990s when I first started covering these Bilderberg conferences. It would say, press release not for publication, which kind of gives the game away, really. These press releases were in those days, and probably to a certain extent still are, really just for the managers and the editors of the mainstream newspapers to know not to report stuff, really. Look, there's a whole bunch of people who are professional, media people, plus politicians, big business, royalty, and this is what they're really up to, is just trying to keep this stuff under wraps. They don't want any reporting of it, which is why it's every year since I first came across these guys back in 1996. I've made a real effort to try and get the buzz around about the fact that they exist. It's the most powerful lobby in the whole of the Western world, really. It's rooted in NATO and in the NATO countries. And the effect of it is said to be making a difference between war and peace. This is something that was told to me by one of the German researchers who was over there, a guy called Klaus Kopf. And people have been working on this in their own ways right across the world, particularly the Western world, since the mid-1990s when this first came out to the public. I mean, when I first came across them, there was a bit of criticism online. This is kind of the early days of the internet, really, but most of it was came from a kind of anti-Semitic point of view, saying this is a Jewish conspiracy, blah blah blah, and there was very little, a little bit, but not much, and which was balanced and sensible. So I looked at this, I grappled with this back in 1996. I thought we've really got to make sure the basic facts are out there about the origins of Bilderberg, with Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, the former SS officer that chaired these conferences from 1954 till 1975, when he was discredited, and also with the lists, simply a list of who the Bilderberg say is there, because we know for sure, for example, with Tony Blair, that people have been going to these meetings without them being on the official list. But in order to start your research, you've got to start with all this basic information, which is what I put on the internet 20 years ago this year, really, and that was the foundation of Bilderberg.org.
Right. And so now, given your years of experience of researching, what do you see coming out of this most recent gathering? What sort of personalities are most prominent? What do you see as the agenda, the 5-year plan, the 1 year, the 3 year, the 5 year plan? As we know, they strategize for longer term and short term.
Well, look, they are absolutely obsessed with the control of media. Even right since the very, very beginning days, we were hearing from Klaus on our radio show tonight, an interview I recorded, that the very first ever meeting of Bilderberg in 1954 in Oosterbeek in Holland, which is a whole story in itself, because that was the venue for a massive battle at the end of World War II, where the British were slaughtered, with a bit of help actually from on the Allies' side, from traitors who wanted to do deals with the Nazis at the end of the war. The very first ever Bilderberg conference, the Germans that were invited to it, they were one guy anyway who was classed as a lawyer in the list. Actually, what he was one of the founding members of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. So that is one of the major newspapers in Germany at the time. Right the way through, they've wanted to control media. But nowadays, what you're looking at is Palantir, DeepMind, Google, etc., and Facebook. Obviously, Peter Thiel's there from PayPal, and these people are the future of funding media, the internet, quite clearly. So that's what these people are interested in controlling, I think, in the future. They want to have all these people on board. David Rockefeller, the old oil monopolist family, he's stopped going to these meetings over the last few years. And I think it's pretty clear that the new monopoly, that is to say, at least they wish it was a monopoly, it nearly is, but it's not quite, are the people like Microsoft and Google that are going to be the monopolists of the future. So they're sitting in there too, with their megabucks friends, that is, Christine Lagarde from the IMF, and the politicians that they're trying to get on board, because that's really what this is about: bringing the politicians on board, the corporate program for the future. Which, whatever it is, I mean, there are really very little in the way of leaks that I've heard of this year, but they're quite clearly looking at controlling the press and the way we see things. It's a kind of, I think, a necessity for them to control the way we see things. Ever since the 9/11 attacks and the great lie of Osama bin Laden being behind it all, they've been obsessed with trying to tell us how to think, particularly here in the Western world, in the NATO countries. And that's aligning itself, of course, with what I was saying about the military. The military people like Petraeus, Breedlove, coming in a little bit early, it seemed, this year to have meetings with Kissinger, pre-Bilderberg meetings. So it's very worrying that the media of the future, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Facebooks, may be aligning themselves with whatever the military purposes are for the future. Extremely dangerous and extremely important that these meetings are covered by the press, and that any media or politicians that go along to Bilderberg are called out for doing it, because the moment they step through that security cordon, they're swearing a vow of secrecy about what's going on in there. That means they're betraying the viewers and listeners, the media people, and the voters are being betrayed by all the politicians that are there. And there are some fantastically powerful ones too.
Mm-hmm. Well, you speak of media manipulation, and it just strikes me as curious that over the Bilderberg weekend, you had two major shootings in Orlando taking place. First, the pop singer who got shot, and then the next night, this shooting at the gay club Pulse, with 103 casualties, supposedly from one gunman, which is tremendous accuracy and ability to actually pull that off in a way, because as one shooter, you would have issues of reloading, you'd have issues of potentially being mobbed, people fleeing the club. So it's very strange to see that number of casualties. So I find it, what is your take on what happened over the weekend in Orlando? Is there any, not necessarily correlation to Bilderberg, but just given this notion of media manipulation, do you see a level of media manipulation going on with these mass shooting events?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I think what we've seen is I've read online eyewitness statements saying pretty much certainly that there were at least two shooters at Orlando, and yet that's not being reported at all by the mainstream press. I think this is the way I read the press nowadays, is if there is stuff which is missing from the coverage, that immediately gets my hackles up. I mean, I'm thinking about, for example, the Orlando shooting is really only one of many of these kinds of events which are happening, which I don't know what your take is, but it seems to me that there's an attempt to really disarm the American people, to say, well, that you're not responsible enough to have guns. Guns are a crazy idea. And there's a lot of people in Britain that think they are. And, we've got a different kind of regime over here with the police very, very rarely armed. I mean, Germany, for example, there are a lot of armed police. You just don't see them. And the police don't really have a willingness and a wish to be armed in Britain. But over in the States, there's a completely different picture. So it seems that there is a definite attempt to bamboozle through the media, the crucial media, to get people to give up their guns. I mean, that seems to be what this is about. But there are other sorts of attacks which are happening. I mean, this is almost every week now. And the idea, I think, Sean, is to bamboozle everybody so that you're barely managing to get grips with the last terrorist attack before another one's happening. I mean, we've seen these stadium attacks, for example, starting pretty much with the Paris attacks last year. And then we've had these kind of, I don't know about over in the US, but in Britain, these kind of, and in Europe, false attacks on stadiums. So the whole stadium is evacuated, but actually it turns out there's nothing really going on. I mean, in Britain, just a couple of weeks ago, we had an evacuation of a stadium, which turned out to be just a fake bomb left in, this is Manchester United up at Trafford Park. a fake bomb left by a team of people who were doing some terror exercise the previous week. And I think this is another aspect to the war on terror, which is an attempt to try and make the terror real. We see it on the TV, that we're told to be very afraid of terrorism, but when someone is affected, the time they've given up, the money they've paid to go and see a football match, etc. Suddenly the terror is real, and I think it's just another aspect of this Islamophobia we're seeing today, which is really the modern version of Hitler's attack on the Jews in the 1930s. That's, I think, really what's going on, is that there is a kind of attempt to take that recipe that Hitler used against the Jews and now use it against the Muslims, to demonize people for what is essentially a terror campaign which is being run by the NATO intelligence services, like, for example, something I'm sure you've come across, which is this Operation Gladio, with attacks all over Europe, in many different countries, particularly Italy, Belgium, some in Germany, which were actually carried out by NATO fascist groups and then blamed on the left. So that, I think, is the overall agenda, and I'm sure Bilderberg, some people anyway at Bilderberg, are very much aware that that's what's going on. For their own private profit, the military-industrial complex are prepared to kill people domestically in order to try and get them to hate the new enemy. It was the Soviet Union, now it's the Muslims.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think, given in regards to your comment about the disarming of the American people, I say, well, the American people can disarm when the U.S. government demilitarizes. That'll be the quid pro quo. So when we see the American, militarization of the planet, this is the most bloated military force in the entire world. The United States is. So it's a complete hypocrisy for anyone in government to tell the American people they can't have weapons. But as far as this notion of centralized control, I keep thinking back to what was considered potentially an apocryphal statement. It couldn't be proven, but it was apparently given by Kissinger it was at a conference. It may have been a Bilderberg conference, but it was in the 90s, I believe. And he said, tomorrow, if the United Nations Blue Helmets go into Los Angeles or an major American city, and they basically, they say that we're here for your benefit, to protect you, the American people would revolt, but then eventually they would get used to it. And it goes back to this notion of this New World Order agenda, which does which is what I think is going on at these type of Bilderberg gatherings, where it is a question of, okay, they're trying to consolidate more and more the power structure at the corporate level, at the governmental level, right?
Well, look, Kissinger, probably, almost certainly, the most dangerous man in the world, actually, a proven war criminal, with the bombing of Cambodia, managing the coup in Indonesia in the 70s, also the coup in Chile in the 70s, one of the men behind many people say, behind the Turkish invasion of Cyprus as well. Now, look, this guy's responsible for the deaths, possibly, of millions of people, especially as he's someone who's been, it looks like, behind the war on terror too. What on earth is he still doing? I actually think it's fair to describe him as running the biggest criminal gang, should we say, kind of protection racket in the world. What Kissinger will do through his company, Kissinger Associates, is it will send some mercenaries, send killers into a country, maybe a small African country. They'll start setting fire to villages, murdering people, causing mayhem, or whatever. And of course, the president will then pick up the phone to the UN and say, what can we do? Send his UN ambassador. Then they get bogged down after a few months. They get nowhere. And then he gets out his credit card, pays his $1 million, and gets to have a chat with Kissinger to find out, right, Henry, what are we supposed to be doing here? What's the answer? So, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, I think it is, in New York he lives, and he must get put through to there, and then you'll find out why you're being harassed by Kissinger. Now, this is one of the reasons I think, we really need to be questioning, why are we paying for the police to be protecting somebody like that, And also, one of the things that I've been doing a bit more research on recently is the Kennedy assassination. And I think it's fair to say that the Bilderberg today is the same gang that killed Kennedy. The money that for Bilderberg came from people like Donovan and Dulles, the CIA, and they were the people who were pushing this kind of CIA Secret Service war agenda in those days. And obviously Kennedy was standing up to it. He wanted to close down the Central Intelligence Agency. He saw the projection of aggressive US foreign policy regime change, I suppose we'd now call it, as completely abhorrent. And so that's why I point the finger at these guys as being part of the reason why we've got mayhem and warmongering and profiteering from death still going on here in the West. We really do need to get our house in order. And in order to do that, I think we need to slap some handcuffs onto some of these Bilderbergers, not just the war criminals, also the financial criminals, people who have been involved in money laundering with Mexican drug cartels. They just sit there and weigh up the difference between the possibility of paying a puny fine to whoever it is, Securities and Exchange Commission or Justice Department, and the amount of money that they've been getting from laundering this drug money is way, way more. So, of course, why wouldn't they get involved with criminals? I think it's Roberto Saviano. I don't know if you've come across him. You may be able to get him on there, Sean, because he's come out with this book, 000, and in that he just explains how the models for global corporations and banks are now being modeled on the most successful narco cartels. And cartels is another thing that Bilderberg is all about. I mean, these guys started with people from, Bernhard, for example, was from the German wartime cartel, chemical and manufacturing cartel, IG Farben. Thyssen, who was one of the original funders of the Nazi Party, would have been very happy at these Bilderberg conferences. So they represent a kind of soft fascism. That is to say, the kinds of big corporations that are not interested in competition. They just want to control regulation. They want to control the law that regulates their industries. They want to get rid of national parliaments. One of the things I was hearing, Sean, at this particular conference was that there are new procedures going through the European Parliament just over the last couple of months, which are all about what they call nation-state bankruptcy. So that is when the nation-state starts to run out of money, the private banks, increasingly not national banks like the Bundesbank or the Bank of England, are able to foreclose on nation-states and literally buy up or start to sell off all their equipment. Now, there were, up until recently, guarantees that the civil service, the army and the police would not be privatised if a nation-state went bankrupt. And now those are being thrown out of the window. So that's what we're looking at, is extreme superpower of private banking, because that seems to be where all of the most power-crazy people, including those that want to make money from war, all go, HSBC being one of the central ones. And the chairman of Bilderberg, he's Henri de Castries. He's the chairman of AXA Insurance. He's now slated over the next couple of months of taking over as the chairman of HSBC, this bank which was founded over in Hong Kong to basically based on the opium trade, making money from selling opium and drugs around the world. So that's where we're at, really. It's a kind of bankster oligarchy running the Western world, buying up political parties and running that Western world in order to do regime change, run roughshod all over the United Nations, and anyone that stands in their way, they just buy them up and close them down.
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty accurate portrayal. What then to make of the Brexit issue, the issue of Britain leaving the EU potentially? Because I know that's being batted around now. I'm sure it was discussed at the Bilderberg conference. And I think just to give it like a little bit of a premise, or just to set up, what exactly does it mean for Britain currently be part of the EU, considering that even though a lot of the impetus for the European Union came from certain British co-thinkers along with former Nazis and a lot of right-wingers on the continent, to this day, Britain isn't really, it's not fully part of the EU. It's not like you guys share, for example, the European Parliament or the banking structure.
Well,
so what does it currently mean, though?
I mean, for example, we do send MEPs to the European Parliament, but we're not part of a Schengen agreement, which is the borders agreement of the EU. We're slightly outside it from that point of view, but we're also outside the Eurozone, the Euro currency zone. That was very deliberate. So although Winston Churchill was one of the people in the 1950s and 60s who was very enthusiastic about what at the time was the European Economic Community. Actually, before that, it was the Iron Steel Community. We've had a lot of people who were enthusiastic from the UK to join. Now, I think it's become clear to enough people in the ruling class here in Britain, the rich and powerful, the establishment, that we're not getting a very good deal from the EU, and also that the bureaucracy is incredibly cumbersome. Because you've got, nearly 30 nation states, all with one vote, all with a veto, that nothing really changes. So you've got the big companies that run, it's not able to react to events. I mean, the events I'd say particularly are the financial crisis we've had with the Eurozone, with the Greeks trying to exit from the arrangement they've got with Deutsche Bank and the German and the Troika, which is the European Central Bank. And they're trying to exit from that, and they've kind of failed last year. And I think a lot of Greeks will be looking at the Brits this week to see, are the British actually going to be successful in exiting from the European Union? And the other major crisis is this migrant and refugee crisis. It was quite interesting, actually, being over in the Bilderberg conference in Germany, chatting to some of the Germans and saying, well, look, we're getting a lot of the refugees from Syria, but actually the German people and the German government weren't behind the Syria crisis. So why should we? Maybe these refugees should be sent straight over to Britain. But it's the EU's inability to deal with controlling its own borders, the mafia running the migrants across the Mediterranean. Sometimes they're refugees, but a lot of them are migrants coming in to get work, maybe second sons of people in Africa coming over to get work in Europe. And then the mafia are also running the migrant camps in Italy, being paid by the Italian government to run these camps. I mean, they're making an absolute fortune out of this. And the EU has been completely impotent in actually stopping that flow. It's just not successful at all. So it seems to me we're dealing with a situation which is a little bit like maybe the managed migration of the Irish and the Scots over to America in the late 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. Actually, it's mostly the 1800s, wasn't it, with the famines, etc. Mm-hmm. Massive number of people moving across a vast. Okay, so the Mediterranean isn't as wide as the Atlantic, and the situations aren't exactly the same. But I think we're looking at we're seeing this as a kind of sort of almost like a natural reaction to war and that kind of thing. Whereas I don't think it is. It's actually being artificially done to bring down wages. That is to say, if you flood the market with cheap labour, wages will be then brought down. And this is one of the reasons why we're seeing all this trouble in France right now, because the French government are trying to bring France into line with other European countries where it's very easy to sack people from their jobs and bring in someone who's maybe a legal worker and bring their wages down, smash the conditions that trade unions have worked for some for centuries in building up a decent, paying conditions for people. That's all being smashed. So I think that's what we're dealing with the reasons why everyone's looking to Britain for Brexit. But the consequences of it, Sean, I think are really unknown. It's quite feasible that the bankers that run our continents, maybe the United States of Europe, with its 500, which is nearly now, with this 500 million people, and you've got your 320 million in the United States of America, people that run this do not want Brexit. They definitely don't. The idea is it's like the Hotel California. You can join, but as soon as you start to leave, you're going to get kicked and punished if you try and get out of it. And I think that's what Britain's going to be looking at, with an immense amount of punishment and hurt done to the British economy, and everyone pointing the finger of blame at Britain, saying if there is, crisis, shockwaves, earthquakes in the global financial system as a result. And let's not forget that many of the banks are actually sitting on the edge of a cliff right now, and they have been for the last few years, since no one's done anything about the original financial crisis in 2008. That people will be pointing the finger at the Brits and say, "How dare you do this? It's a terrible thing you've done." Actually, of course, it's just pointing the finger of blame at someone else. This time it's not the Jews or the Muslims, it's the Brits for Brexit. Actually, it's the real problem is that we don't have any real democracy at all, and we're being managed by a bunch of banksters. These are people that I think at the top of the tree, with a little bit lower down the tree, the military and the media almost being co-opted into lying for the military over things like ISIS, as we see almost every night on our TV. You know, this. I mean, the other thing with Orlando is everybody seems to be trying to cash in on this ISIS being behind it, but obviously this guy wasn't actually. It doesn't look anything to do with him. ISIS will come in and claim it. ISIS being really a tool of the Turks and NATO, but then that's just in order to get people to be more, I suppose, afraid, and using fear as a tool to mould the population to be more afraid of foreign-looking people. That's the way I see it, Sean.
Sure. I mean, yeah, of course, you utilize an event like this mass shooting, whether or not that was staged and created or simply you use it after the fact. But the point is to still play into this overall dialectic that you're talking about, which is ultimately it's a system of power that has a corporate financial control structure that supersedes nation states and actual national sovereignty, and ultimately it's predicated in debt, it's predicated in war, it's predicated in slavery, basically cheaper wages, right? To trying to destroy the overall, I would say, the economy that's been built up in Western Europe and America since the end of World War II. And these have been on slow, gradual decline. Some people even would say that we could be looking at another financial crisis as soon as this fall, if not next year.
Crash. Listen, I'd say crash, not crisis, because we had a crash in 1929. And FDR did a very good job in actually slowly bringing people out, which is why there was a coup attempt against him in 1934 by Prescott Bush. I don't consider 2008 a crash at all. It was a financial crisis and a bailout which avoided a crash. And I actually think we need to actually experience this crash at some point, in order to just reset to reality what's going on in the financial system. Look, capitalism died in 2008. It's not actually, whatever we've got now, it isn't capitalism, because the only way that asset prices and share prices are being kept up is through this crazy injection of fake new money, quantitative easing into the system. And of course, that isn't trickling down to ordinary people at all. It's not trickling down into better pay, more jobs, or anything like that. We're in a kind of almost I hate to say it, but a communist system where the economies are being managed from above. Actually, this time it's by people like Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, and the banking regulators and the Bank for International Settlements, the central banker's central bank in Switzerland, seems to be running things far more than our own governments at all. I mean, I think in a way you could look upon it. This may be I don't know if I'm right about this, but it's kind of anarcho-capitalism, where you've got a lawless. There isn't any real proper regulation. You've got a lawless world going on there, and the Bank for International Settlements, for etc. I think that's where they're coming from. Anarcho-capitalism, where actually it's almost like a religion. Money's all that matters, and the banks control the money system. They control the cash points, the exchange systems. The governments are losing control of all of that. Have lost control of it pretty much, and so it's a religion based around banking and based around money. And so the idea is to get rid of any kind of moral idea from the way we think and just try and train the entire population to just make their decisions based on which is going to be better or worse for me in regards to how much money I can get out of it. So they're getting rid of any kind of moral values and replacing them with financial values. This is a kind of subconscious trick they're playing, I think.
Yeah, even monetary values more than financial even. But I think that's an interesting point. And the question then becomes, do you think that the Bilderbergers care who becomes the next president of the United States? Or does it really just, whoever's going to inherit this position, if in fact we have an election, if in fact everything goes smoothly before then, because who knows if the financial crisis comes before, if there's some major events, we could see delays. But if there's a smooth transition, whoever is coming into power is going to inherit serious problems for the American economy, for our global strategy vis-a-vis the Middle East. I mean, they're inheriting a war economy, continuous war in Syria, and Iran potentially as a next target, not necessarily for war, but certainly for some type of conflict, potentially Saudi Arabia as well. There's a lot that's brewing. So do you think the Bilderbergers care who's the next president?
No, not necessarily, because I think you've got basically two maniacs seem to be the front runners. I was actually at a museum at Cosford, an RAF museum, a couple of months ago, just in the sort of north of West Midlands near Birmingham. And in there, they had a display which was about the Cuban Missile Crisis. You go into this kind of little shack, and the newsreel footage runs of JFK kind of trying to manage this crisis. And at the end of it, it says, I mean, it's actually quite chilling, you know, parts of it. And at the end of it, it says, well, actually, what really happened was that NATO then moved and the US moved nuclear weapons out of Turkey, but they never made any fuss about that. That was just a little deal, quiet deal they'd done with the Russians. And a lot of what the Cuban Missile Crisis was about was to save face on that. So, and I wonder, at the end of it, I was just thinking, well, if we were to have that sort of crisis today with a Donald Trump or a Hillary Clinton in charge, well, there wouldn't be much left of the world, because these sorts of characters like Trump and Clinton just simply don't have the, first of all, the integrity. I mean, we've seen Trump changing his mind every 5 minutes about this, that, and everything, and also the crucial separation from the military-industrial complex to actually have humanity's best interests at heart. So I think we're in a very dangerous situation. I don't think there will be any problems with actually having an election in the US, because you've got two maniacs to choose from, both of whom, I mean, it's all Trump's mafia connections, are far closer to the people who make money out of war, the military-industrial complex people, than they are to ordinary people now. I mean, you know, it's a TV world. One of the things that I was looking at was that the Nazis in Germany were part of one of the big parts of their campaign was that radio had just been invented in the 1930s. So every day, Hitler would give a little speech to the people, and they could all listen to him. Well, the commentator at the time, who was a Luftwaffe pilot, I think I was watching this film called Why Hitler Lost the War. Well, I'm not sure he actually did, but why he lost the war. And in this, it says, well, thank God he didn't have television. Well, actually, of course, now they do have television, and television is very, very powerful. George Orwell was, as a British writer in 1984, and other books that he wrote, particularly 1984, though, goes into just what a powerful weapon this can be to bamboozle vast areas of the world's population. And I guess that's what we're looking at with the election, is just, you know, to provide this as a illusion of some kind of choice. Of course, there's no real choice at all. And Klaus Kopf, the guy who we had on our radio show tonight from Germany, one of the original Bilderberg researchers from Germany, he was explaining to me how the TV over there and the radio and the whole sort of media treatment of the Bilderbergers was there right from the very start, from this guy from Frankfurt, major newspaper in Germany, was right in at the very, very first meeting. And they do very much try to make sure that there's nobody else doing stuff outside. Obviously, on the internet, we can still do bits and pieces, but nobody is going to have the truth shoved in their face anymore, Sean. I think we're all just going to have to go out and search out for it individually. It's been very, very difficult to find out what's really going on, unless you take a great deal of interest. And of course, our time is being robbed from us in all sorts of other ways. So that's not necessarily going to be very easy to do.
Well, it can become harder and harder to find the truth with Google and these other, providers, search engines, basically consolidating their power and their relationship to government. So basically making our searches themselves harder to find the truth.
It's spinning information about candidates, for example. Some really good articles recently saying that they can increase candidates' approval rating. Google can themselves just by 13%, and drop by 25% candidates' approval rating. So this is where we're going. We're going to a sort of a technocratic world where actually democratic politics is just a kind of theatre put there for amusement of the rich and powerful.
Unfortunately, probably all too accurate an analysis I think you're providing. And I think also the point is that we're caught up so much with these potential candidates, or let's say the candidates themselves in the potential elections coming up, and we're not thinking at all about what's going on in the meantime. So it'll be interesting to see what occurs, I think, over the next few months in this country, globally. Are we going to continue this path to hell? Unfortunately, it looks that way. But we'll see as things unfold.
Well, so, look, I think look, I mean, let's not be too much doom and gloom about it, because for a start, the New World Order global elites plan for the Middle East, particularly, which is one of the things that they've been looking at for a long, long time. If you go back to the 3 Days of the Condor, the Sidney Pollack film from the 70s, that even then Robert Redford was talking about, hey, you're going to invade the Middle East. That was back in, I think came out in 1975, that film. It's very, very, very much behind schedule. And also the Iranians and the Russians have had a long, long time to prepare for this. So they're way behind schedule. And I think that doesn't bode well for them. So they are going to have a fight on their hands. You can be absolutely sure. I think what with the internet, which has raised people's awareness a tremendous amount over the last, 20 years or so. Also, you've got a lot of young people. We had a report out here in Britain saying they don't watch television anymore. They're just simply not getting their news there at all. They don't trust it. They've been using social media. I think we've got a very, very switched on population, particularly here in Britain. A lot of young people are very much aware that the government is not to be trusted, and it's basically been bought by a rich elite. And so if they are going to try and manipulate us in some kind of manner, which they clearly are, but to bamboozle us, I think we have the capacity, mental capacity, to put up a pretty good fight here in the West. Whilst I imagine the Chinese and the Russians, the Indians and Brazilians, many other powerful countries on earth, in Africa too, South Africans, will be watching with great interest. And one of the guys I interviewed, an American guy his family had experienced some, quite close encounters, shall we say, with the military-industrial complex in the States. He was saying that he thinks that actually what we're looking at is a kind of, rather than world war, kind of civil wars where governments are starting to turn on their own people. Using some of the tactics they've used on foreign countries because they've been stonewalled. Basically, it looks like they can't expand in other parts of the world. They'll be trying to use some of those tactics on us, and I think that really will wrong foot them because, you're going to have a definite resistance right across the Western world to that kind of thing. If governments start acting in that tyrannical, despotic manner, they've kind of painted themselves into a corner. And I guess after all of this, we have some kind of a revolution. Goodness knows what will happen. Certainly a revolution in consciousness. Then we really do have a chance to get to grips with some of the real basic things, Sean, and focus on the positive. That is to say, things like guaranteeing food, water and shelter to everybody on this planet, which is well within our capabilities. Once we start focusing on that, I think these guys will just melt away into the distance.
Well, I hope so, Tony. I appreciate you saying it and coming on. And obviously, people can check you out more online to find more of your journals and keep themselves updated on world events as they unfold. So I appreciate you taking the time to join us today, Tony.
That's much appreciated too. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. Thank you again. Well, there you go, folks. Some great insights from Tony Gosling. You can check him out more at bilderberg.org, thisweek.org.uk. And certainly, I think some of his insights are perfectly accurate, that we are in the midst of this brewing civil war situation, if you believe Captain America and what they're trying to tell us. But beyond that, there will be ultimate, let's say, restitution that will be occurring, whether it's next year, whether it's 10 years, sooner or later, all crimes will be exposed and amends will be made. This is Sean Stone signing off.